The ledger was never sealed, never hidden behind locks or guarded by authority. It sat openly in the Mississippi State Archives basement, resting on a metal shelf already bending under the weight of forgotten records. Its leather spine was cracked, its pages swollen from decades of humidity, floods, and neglect. This was not a book meant to be remembered. It was meant to function, to record, and then to disappear into irrelevance once its purpose was fulfilled. In 2008, during a digitization effort intended to preserve county birth registers before they disintegrated completely, a volunteer archivist scrolled through, scanned pages expecting monotony. Dates, names, locations. The predictable rhythm of history reduced to paperwork. What she found instead was a silence written in ink. Several entries where names should have been were replaced by numbers. Not abbreviations. Not symbols. Clean, deliberate numerals, written with the same careful hand as the surrounding text. At first glance, it looked like a clerical shortcut, the kind of lazy notation common in understaffed 19th century offices. But when the archivist aligned the dates, something unsettling emerged. The same woman's name appeared again and again across different plantations, different counties, and different years. Eliza. Each time, a birth followed. Each time, the child was numbered. And each time, within months, a sale was recorded. The spacing between births was not random. It was exact. 18 months. Enough time for recovery. Enough time to repeat the process. 5 births. 5 numbers. 5 sales. Over 7 years. Precision like that does not come from chance. It comes from planning. What the ledger revealed was not a single act of cruelty, but a system designed to function quietly, efficiently, and without witnesses. To understand how a woman's life could be reduced to timed intervals and inventory marks, we have to return to the moment her name first entered the record. Because Eliza's story was never written in letters, never spoken in testimony, and never preserved in memory. It was written in margins, columns, and numbers, by people who never imagined anyone would read it again. Antebellum plantation economies relied not only on crops, but on predictability. Cotton, sugar, and tobacco demanded labor that could be calculated, scheduled, and replaced. Enslaved people were categorized the same way land and equipment were. Ledgers tracked productivity, losses, and gains with brutal clarity. Births were not moments of joy. They were future assets. In many regions of the American South after the transatlantic slave trade was restricted, plantations increasingly depended on internal population growth. This reality created incentives that were rarely discussed openly but were carefully documented. Women of childbearing age were monitored, transferred, and valued differently depending on their perceived reproductive capacity. These practices were not always centralized in one location. Instead, networks of plantations, traders, and estate managers cooperated through informal agreements. A woman might be moved from one property to another under the guise of labor redistribution, when in reality she was part of a rotational system designed to maximize births while minimizing emotional attachment. Infants were often sold young, before bonds could interfere with productivity. Records avoided language that acknowledged trauma. Children were listed as increase. Mothers were listed as female stock. In this environment, naming a child held little economic value. Numbers were more efficient. Numbers could be tracked across ledgers. Numbers did not invite questions. The ledger that recorded Eliza's life did not stand out because it was cruel. It stood out because it was organized. The consistency of its entry suggests coordination, not chaos. It suggests a shared understanding among plantation owners and traders about how such women were to be used, moved, and eventually discarded. Eliza was not unique. What made her visible was the survival of her records and the precision with which they were kept. To follow those records is to watch a system operate exactly as intended. Eliza first appears in the historical record in 1848 in Natchez, Mississippi, one of the most active slave markets along the river. The market operated near the docks, where steamboats arrived daily carrying goods, traders, and human cargo. The structure itself was unremarkable. A long open shed designed to allow buyers to inspect merchandise in natural light. Eliza was 17 years old. Her listing contained no surname, no place of birth, and no family connection. Just measurements, temperament notes, and a price, $620. That price reflected youth, health, and physical capability. Buyers examined her hands, checking for softness or scars. They looked at her posture, her hips, her teeth. These inspections were routine, efficient, and public. When the bidding ended, Eliza was sold to Oak Ridge Plantation. Oak Ridge specialized in cotton production and prided itself on output efficiency. Upon arrival, Eliza was assigned to field labor. The ledger recorded her as a female hand, a designation that stripped away individuality entirely. Days followed a rigid structure. Work began before sunrise and continued until exhaustion made further labor impossible. Overseers enforced pace with violence that rarely appeared in official records. The ledger only tracked results. For nearly 2 years, Eliza's name appears only in attendance and labor columns. Then, in early 1850, there is a pause. No notation explains it. And then, in August, the ledger speaks again. An infant is born. The entry is clinical. No name, just infant. Male. Healthy. Mark. Number 12. That number becomes the child's identity on paper. 18 months later, the next entry confirms the system at work. The child is sold. Eliza is transferred. The cycle begins. After the sale of infant number 12, Eliza did not remain at Oak Ridge Plantation long enough for grief to register as resistance. The ledger shows her transfer dated within the same month. A detail that matters because speed was essential to the system's efficiency. Emotional attachment was a liability. The faster a woman was moved, the less disruption followed. Eliza was transported south toward Louisiana. Delivered to Riverbend Estate, a sugar plantation operating along a bend in the river that flooded annually and demanded brutal labor schedules. Sugar cultivation required precision and punishment in equal measure. Workers were driven hard during planting and harvest seasons, and rest periods were minimal. Eliza arrived without ceremony. The ledger entry lists her as received stock, condition acceptable. No mention of recent childbirth. No allowance recorded. The system assumed recovery because the timeline demanded it. For months, Eliza worked in the cane fields, cutting stalks that tore its skin and soaked clothing with sap and sweat. Overseers measured output by weight and speed. Any slowdown was punished. The ledger remained silent through this period, which is exactly what makes its next entry so revealing. September 1852. Infant born to Eliza. Female. Condition healthy. Mark number 19. Same handwriting. Same format. Same absence of humanity. The consistency suggests training. Someone knew how to record this. Someone expected to. 18 months later, March 1854. The ledger notes the sale of infant number 19 to a regional trader operating between parishes. There is no pause. No explanation. And once again, Eliza is transferred. This time to Cypress Grove, a mixed crop plantation experimenting with labor efficiency models popularized in agricultural journals of the era. Cypress Grove's records are especially detailed. They tracked weather, output, tool wear, and workforce rotation. Eliza's entry includes a marginal note. Rotational assignment confirmed. This is the first explicit acknowledgement that her movement was intentional, coordinated, and anticipated. At Cypress Grove, Eliza's role was split between light field labor and domestic tasks. Not out of kindness, but calculation. Her body was an asset under management. The ledger shows reduced workloads during certain months, followed by gradual increases. No explanation is written, but the timing aligns perfectly. The next birth occurs in late 1853. Infant. Male. Mark. Number 27, sold in early 1855, the intervals never shift. The margin notes grow more technical. Cycle maintained. Transfer approved. By now, Eliza's life exists entirely within schedules written by others. Plantation 4, Willow Bend, receives her in mid-1855. Willow Bend specialized in short-term labor contracts and regularly dealt with traders. Its owner viewed enslaved people less as community labor and more as movable capital. Eliza's arrival coincides with a gap in their labor projections. The ledger notes her as productive potential. This language appears nowhere else. At Willow Bend, Eliza gives birth to infant number 33, sold. Again. Each sale price is carefully noted, increasing slightly with market demand. The children are sold young, before they can remember. Before they can slow production. Eliza is moved again. Blackwater Estate. Final plantation. By 1856, Eliza's body shows signs the ledger does not name. Her age is never updated, but her condition is. The final birth is recorded. Infant number 41. Female. Healthy. But this time, the pattern breaks. There is no sale. No transfer. Weeks pass in the record. Then months. Finally, a short notation appears beside Eliza's name. Subject showing decline. No explanation. No follow-up. No recorded outcome. Her name disappears from the ledger entirely. The system does not record failure well. It records success repeatedly and abandonment quietly. Eliza's disappearance is not an anomaly. It is the final stage of the process. Once a rotational asset ceased to meet productivity expectations, it was removed from circulation. Sometimes that meant reassignment to harder labor until death. Sometimes it meant sale under a different classification. Sometimes it meant erasure. The ledger does not care which. What matters is continuity. The system continues uninterrupted. The archivist who traced Eliza's entries did not find a grave. Did not find a death certificate. Did not find a sale receipt. Eliza simply stops being profitable enough to record. What remains are the numbers assigned to her children. Scattered across different ledgers. Different estates, different futures. Those children grew up with names given by new owners. Identities rewritten, origins obscured. Their earliest records begin not with birth, but with purchase. The system ensured that no single document told the full story. Only by aligning ledgers across counties does the machinery become visible. This was not cruelty driven by impulse. It was exploitation refined into process. Every interval served a purpose. Every transfer reduced risk. Every number replaced a name to prevent memory. The ledger never lies, but it never explains itself either. It assumes understanding. It assumes agreement. It assumes no one will ever read across its pages looking for patterns. And for more than a century, that assumption held. After Eliza's name disappears from the Blackwater Estate ledger, the system does not pause, does not reflect, and does not acknowledge loss. New entries continue immediately below hers. Other women, other numbers. Other transactions recorded with the same steady hand. The absence of Eliza is itself the final record. In plantation accounting, disappearance was not an event worth noting. It was a resolution. By 1857, Blackwater's labor projections shift, indicating replacement stock acquired through different channels. Eliza is no longer needed. Somewhere between that last notation and the next season's planting, her body was exhausted beyond the margins of profitability. Whether she was reassigned to field labor, sold under a reduced valuation, or worked until death is not written, the system did not require closure. It required continuity. Meanwhile, the children marked with numbers continued moving through the world as property without histories. Infant number 12, sold at 18 months. Likely entered a trader's holding pen before being resold to a mid-sized plantation further south. At that age, memory had not yet fully formed, which was precisely the point. No maternal attachment to interfere with obedience. No questions to answer. By the time he was old enough to work, his origin would be irrelevant. The ledger that recorded his sale would not travel with him. Infant number 19, sold 2 years later, followed a similar path. Traders often split siblings intentionally, even when buyers requested pairs. Separation reduced the risk of coordinated resistance. The numbers assigned at birth did not follow the children into new records. New owners renamed them. New ledgers recorded them as first-time purchases. Their earlier existence was erased by design. This fragmentation of identity was not accidental. It was structural. Plantation economies relied on disconnection. When people could not trace themselves backward, they could not assert continuity. They could not claim lineage. They could not claim loss. The only place those connections still existed was in the ledgers themselves. Waiting for someone to align dates, prices, and margins across jurisdictions. By the late 1850s, agricultural journals of the South openly discussed efficiency models that mirrored what Eliza's life had already demonstrated in practice: rotation of labor, strategic transfers, minimization of downtime. Nowhere did they mention women by name. They spoke in abstractions. Output, yield, replacement rate. Eliza was an early data point in a system that would expand rapidly until war disrupted it. When the Civil War began, many ledgers were abandoned, destroyed, or repurposed. Some were lost to fire. Others were buried under newer records. The ledger that preserved Eliza's story survived by accident. Flooded but legible. Ignored but intact. When the archivist finished digitizing the final page, there was no dramatic revelation. No singular moment of understanding. Just the slow accumulation of facts that refused to remain isolated. 5 births. 5 numbers. Perfect intervals. Coordinated transfers. A disappearance time to declining productivity. This was not hidden history. It was simply never read horizontally. Historians often study one plantation at a time. One county. One owner. Eliza's life crossed boundaries those studies rarely connect. That is why the system worked. No single ledger confessed. Together, they revealed everything. The archivist documented the pattern and submitted her findings as supplemental notes, not expecting widespread attention. But the implications were unavoidable. Eliza was not an exception. She was evidence. Evidence of a reproductive economy operating quietly alongside agricultural production. Evidence of women treated as renewable resources. Evidence of children converted into inventory before they could speak. The system did not require cruelty to function. It required compliance, coordination, and silence. And it received all three. When the ledger finally ends in 1860, the numbers stop abruptly. War interrupts the machinery. Armies move through plantations. Records are scattered. The system collapses not because it was exposed, but because it was no longer profitable under chaos. Yet the damage remains. The children who survived grew into adults without histories they could access. Names changed. Records fractured. Memory became rumor. Eliza's name, written carefully 5 times, is the only constant left. It is not a monument. It is not a tribute. It is a data point that refuses to stay quiet. In the present day, standing in that archive basement, the archivist understood that the ledger was never meant to be read this way. It was meant to account, not to testify. It was meant to justify, not to remember. The ledger ended in 1860. Eliza's story did not. It continues in the absence left behind. In the unanswered questions carried by descendants, who will never know why their lineage begins mid-sentence, mid-record, mid-life. History often survives through voices raised in protest. Eliza's survived through ink, numbers, and a system confident no one would ever bother to connect them.